we get to do this again, huh? I'm Bernie Bannett. Brian's with Janet. We're going to be talking about Belle Kogan, who lived for, as you can see, most of the 20th century. You know her as one of the wonderful Red Wing art pottery designers. The design profession knows her as the first American woman to be considered an industrial designer. So she has an important role in history, even in addition to her Red Wing contributions. I know her in another way, as you may have heard. I'm her nephew. So she knew me before I remember knowing her. Back in 1944, there we are together in New York. I haven't changed, right?
Don't know.
I guess I asked for that. I'm connected. My wife Barb and I are connected, as you are, by also being Red Wing collectors. So we've been at this for a while. We've been to the convention here a couple of times before in '93 and '95 when the river was flooding. We're very glad to see it dry this year. If you come to our home, I imagine it looks like some of yours. Red Wing everywhere. There it is. Some of our collection is up there. So we've been trying to assemble Belle Kogan art pottery in collected form for some time, maybe since 1990 or so. I didn't get much from her. A few pieces handed down through my mother, but that's about it. We had to do it the way you do. Antique malls, the societies, show and sale, and eBay, I suppose. You may know that Belle designed art pottery, kitchenware, dinnerware for Red Wing. The first thing we're going to do is just try to go through very quickly her Red Wing productions, then a little bit about her life, and finally some of the products she did for other companies in totally other media, not just pottery, so you get an idea of the range of things. And maybe when you're in an antique store, you'll happen to see something, and you'll say, oh yeah, now I recognize that's Belle Kogan. It's not even pottery. I want to thank Ray Reese for the use of his beautiful slides. They are the same images as in his two art pottery volumes on Red Wing art pottery.
Last time we found that you sat down.
Oh, I have to sit down. Okay, you'll find Barb keeps me on track. In general, I do exactly what she tells me.
You're smart man.
The problem was last time she told me to click instead of double click, and it took us 5 minutes to figure it. All right. The first thing she did, as you may know, is the Belle Kogan 100. In 1938, George Rumrill had gone separate ways with Red Wing potteries. They needed a new line, new products. Belle Kogan was already a known designer in New York, and they challenged her to come up with 150 shapes. 150 shapes. They pick 100 to produce was the idea, and they did it. And she did it. I don't know how. They're wonderful shapes. They're really fun to collect. They show the Art Deco kind of influence of the times, and they're in a wonderful array of shapes and colors. I'm not going to show you 100 of them. This whole thing is just going to be a little sample of her work. You'll see some familiar glazes that were used in Rumrill earlier. So she didn't get to say at all times what the glazes should be. They sometimes used their popular glazes on her shapes. And some of them came out very well. I love the Dutch blue. You know, it might not have been what she would have chosen at the time, but it's spectacular. You see classic influences, Art Deco, just very happy shapes like this one. Most of them are plain and unadorned. She really didn't like this idea of putting a little doodad on something. That wasn't her favorite thing to do at all.
Are these marked with the bead, or?
Good question. No, I think I had the range up there on the first slide, 745, maybe 744 to what's the final one in the range? 859. No B before it. Her early pieces, no B. It's not until 1950 that you see a B. Her later pieces, 1960s, 1962, 1964, no B. It's only the 50s pieces that have a B. She wanted to keep track of her royalties. The company said that's the only way to do it. We have to put it in the item number, in the part number. You know, so they put the B's in the 50s. But if you think that all you need to know is whether it has a B or not, and that's a Belle Kogan, no. She did all the B pieces, maybe there are one or two that were errors, but there are a lot that weren't. So now, if you want, thank you, Barb, if you want our attempt to put together a list of the 400 shapes or so that she did, there's the BK100, Belle Kogan 100, and all the others are in two lists on the redwingnet.com site. The easiest way to find these two lists is to search in Google for Belle Kogan in quotes, Red Wing in quotes, and you know there's spaces there, and spaces in between, and our last name, Bannett, B-A-N-E-T. Those will bring up two web URLs. They're long ones, that's why I don't want to give them to you as, you know, just directly. And that will bring up, you can click on those two lists, but remember they're two. Neither one of them is complete. Put the two together and you'll get the approximately 400 shapes that she did, not including the dinner. Yeah, but if you go to redwingnet.com, it's hard to find. I find it's not that well organized. So it may be easier to use Google to go to it, or another search engine, I imagine. I haven't tried them all. You know, too, that these shape numbers were recycled. For some reason, Red Wing thought numbers were going out of style or something. There was a limit to the number of integers in the universe. I don't know what the deal was. So they reused numbers. And so it's not enough to know that, oh, it's 746, that's in the 100 range. Oh, that must be Belle Kogan. You know, it's not that simple, unfortunately. But you probably already know this as collectors. It's a little more complicated. But those lists would help. They list the height of the bays, for example, which would be a clue as to whether the particular, you know, number 751 that you have in front of you is a Belle Kogan 100 or not. Because it'll tell you whether it's a 7.5-inch bays or just what it is. 1939, this unglazed, grooved line, which was inspired by, I think, pottery she saw being made in Europe at the time, harkens back to handmade pottery thrown on a potter's wheel, beautiful classic shapes. Some of them apparently were produced glazed. At least we have a bunch of them that have a transparent glaze, but many of them were unglazed. The unglazed ones are fragile. You often find them with chips, unfortunately. Terracraft. You've all seen this, the shape number 892, introduced in 39, in production through 1966. I think Wally Armstrong said that there were 33 flavors of this, 33 different color combinations. I think a beautiful shape, obviously a popular shape. For collectors, well, they're a dime a dozen. They're too common to be all that interesting to collectors unless you're trying to put together all 33 colors. But I think, obviously, for her, a commercial and design triumph, just the same. Other vases from that time. Someone in the earlier session suggested that maybe some of these shapes were from the 50, of the 150 she designed for the Belle Kogan 100. And that they got then used slightly later and introduced a little later. I find that plausible because they're similar in spirit to the Belle Kogan 100, some of these shapes. She was very proud of this, I think it's a hurricane lantern shape on the right, candle holder. Liked that a lot. Now she also did dinnerware, hostessware in the Gypsy Trail line. The Fondoso is hers, with that distinctive leaf pattern on it, you know. This is how they presented some of the hostessware pieces. The fruit shapes that she did for the Gypsy Trail line. This is original marketing materials. Yes, the fruit-shaped cookie jars are hers. There's another one in the series, right, bananas, that's not in the picture here. But you see pineapple, apple, grapes, pear, there was bananas. The cabbage in the series is not hers. That's a very rare one, but she didn't do that. 1940, she does Magnolia. Magnolia is not probably her favorite line. It's too traditional for her. She wanted contemporary design, contemporary shapes. But this is what Red Wing needed to fill in shapes that had disappeared with the rum reel line. So she comes and does Magnolia. Note the shapes she did for in Magnolia in 1940, 975 to 1032 are hers, but the 1200s that I think were introduced in 46 are not Belle Kogan. So just because it's Magnolia, it's not necessarily Belle Kogan. She did the original ones in 1940 that only go through 1032, not the 1200 series. Very popular with collectors, as I say, not her favorite. She left her contract. No, understand, she was never an employee of Red Wing. She was an independent contractor with her own design firm in New York. So Charles Murphy comes on the scene in 1940, I believe. Her contracts phase out. She doesn't come back again until late 40s, 1950 era, as Charles Murphy was for the first time leaving the scene. And he comes back later also. But he's based here in Red Wing and works for the company exclusively. She's doing things for all kinds of manufacturers and all kinds of different products in New York. So it comes back in the late 40s, early 50s with typical shapes of the time, right? Amorphous shapes, amoebas, whatever you want to call them. These were in the Garden Club series. Then you know the Tropicana series, 1950, with the Desert Flower, Bird of Paradise, Shelled Ginger relief figure on them. She probably liked the ones that came out without these figures on them. And there are some. You'll find some in the Tropicana shapes without the relief on them at all. No shelled ginger, nothing. But this is how you'll typically find them, with one or the other of the relief figures. Texture comes back. I think recalling Terracraft, she does Textura. In fact, when we talked to her about them, she had a hard time distinguishing Terracraft and Textura. By the time she was 90, I guess you could, understand that things began to be a little harder to keep track of. But they were both the textured lines, and Textura in 1950, some radical shapes. I think a lot of them don't look all that wonderful to us today. They're a little weird and not all that beautiful, but they were in tune with the 1950s, including the color combinations, obviously, pink and gray and all that wonderful stuff. Notice here the B numbers appear. Here is the B for the first time in 1950. Textura. Maybe Textura was too radical, then they introduced classical line, which she does in 1951. Nice, simple shapes, somewhat traditional, often in that celadon color, right? 1951, I guess the interesting thing there is they had a new opportunity for a whole new class of products for the big change that was occurring in the living room, which was the television. All right, so they were introducing these figures, often planters or lamps, to go on the top of a TV set. The ducks are an example there from one of the original publicity photos. You've seen the Muse. There are the two nymphs in the same series. And then wonderful 50s shapes in vases, often two vases that fit together. There were things called duo vases that kind of nested or fit together. Could be assembled puzzle pieces. Sometimes, often you see these sold separately, right? There's a B 1418A, and you know if you get that, maybe you'll find it's made somewhere down the line. Some of the fun of collecting, right, is putting these things back together. Candle holders in the 50s, a lot of two-opening vases. She liked to do those. Those sort of her most successful and striking pieces. Glad vases all over the place at that time. A very successful design for Red Wing, the 416 series Glad vases. Here's one where they punch holes in them. I'm not sure she did that. I think maybe she didn't even like that very much, but some of them had the holes in them. This is how they pictured them with Glads. Notice they don't look so monstrous when you have these tall Glads in them. They were properly scaled to the height of the flower. Alone, they seem a bit huge, right? Although they are, I think there are three different sizes of these 416. One of her more striking designs is double B 1433 from 1953. This is in at least one museum as an example of wonderful 1950s ceramic design. Beautiful piece. I guess in the 50s nothing was supposed to be simply square or rectangular. Vases also had this, anything but cylindrical, and these were great. You've seen them also with interesting glazes that were introduced at the time. I don't think she had much to say about some of the glazes. Some of them she did, I'm sure, because color was something she really was strong on and advised many different manufacturers about color, including, what the... I think she sat on that small committee of people who decides for many different industries what the in color is going to be. I think she was one of those people. So she'd write authoritative articles about, it's 1958 and everything is going to be brown. But Red Wing put their own glazes on things like this. Came in that Oxford, black and white speckled thing, and it also came in the overlay glazes. The anniversary year, 53, I think, was about the time she was then phasing out her 1950s contract with Red Wing. So I don't know if she had much to do with selecting the overlay for these vases, but they make spectacular vases, don't they? So she goes off and does other things in New York and is brought back when the company is really having trouble in the 60s to do something more spectacular. I think they had already given Charles Murphy the franchise to do some really artistic, innovative things in the late 50s. Now they turned to her and said, let's do this, let's really do something that's a little more dramatic than we were doing earlier, and a little different. This was a line prismatique that was hard to manufacture. She helped figure out how it could be made, and it was wonderfully geometric. You've heard the story that some of the pieces were inspired by seeing a tooth on the dentist tray in the dentist's office. I think the piece on the, well, I think most of these pieces you can see have the facets like a tooth. Maybe she was also thinking crowns at the same time. Prismatique. She was very proud of that one. When we saw her when she was 90 in Israel, she had macular degeneration, had trouble seeing, but she'd have a big easel tablet on the wall with magic marker, some of the things that she had to remember when she talked to people about her work. And in very big letters was Prismatique, because she had to always mention that. It was definitely one of her favorite lines that she did for Red Wing. A beautiful one. This is how they pictured them at the time being used. Then in 63 and 64, Belle line, inspired by Scandinavian pottery of the time. The matte brown glaze, right? The simple, elegant shapes. The photograph on the bottom is from our collection. It's not, don't blame it on Reese, the quality of the photography. But they're in beautiful array of shapes. Named obviously after Belle Kogan. Okay, that's just an overview of the main lines that she did. There are many individual shapes you'll find on the list that don't fit neatly into these lines. So we didn't show you 400 of them. You sort of have to work with the B numbers and with our lists and figure out whether you've got a Belle Kogan or no. Yes, she also did dinnerware. She did two shapes as well as the patterns on them. Fancy Free, Caprice, and Desert are the two patterns in that shape. Dynasty has only one pattern, Plum Blossom. Dynasty inspired by Asian designs. Barb's wearing a Caprice piece of jewelry done by Byron Bush. Belle liked Caprice very much, and that was in her Fancy Free shape. It looks a little bit like a TV screen of the era, doesn't it? This is Desert from Fancy Free shape. This is how they market it. Notice they have her name on the publicity materials. She was a name designer, a designer label, if you will, from 1938 or before. I mean, she was known, and they would use her name in advertising and stuff. There's Caprice and Desert. Now, she didn't do the very popular Concord shape as a shape, but she did patterns for it. Lanterns, buds, which is, you'll never find it. It's, there are very few in existence. You'll never find it, apparently, because when they showed it to the buyers at the introductory show for it, nobody wanted it, so they immediately discontinued it. So not a commercial success at all for Red Wing or for Belle Kogan, who got royalties on some of these things, by the way, by each piece sold as part of her compensation. But for collectors, of course, it's a different story. The things that were least commercially successful are most valued because they're rarest. Iris, Zinnia, Country Gardens in the anniversary shape, right? I have that right? That's her Red Wing work, just a sample. Couldn't show you all the pieces, just a sample of the Red Wing work. So maybe you have a better idea of the range of things she designed and how to tell what she did. I've got two more sections that I want to talk about, her life and her other products, if you'll bear with me. Do you have any questions that I can try to answer at the same time that I queue up the next couple of things?
I mean, part of her compensation was like a penny a piece? Or?
I don't know. I don't know. It couldn't have been much, could it?
I don't think so.
But I think she was on a retainer and then had royalties in addition. That's the typical way they do it, and that's why the accounting with the B numbers was so important, because she was kind of suspicious that maybe they weren't counting every piece, you know. And without computers and barcodes and all that, it would have been real easy, and it would have been totally unauditable as well. Yes, Barb? Not on that one, no. I have to move over. And I have to find my cursor. Bear with me.
Barb, could I zoom in on your jewelry?
Is it taken from a piece of jewelry?
A broken piece.
Yes, they didn't. No pottery was broken in the manufacture. It was from already a broken piece that iron.
Thank you.
Nice.
Will you be talking about her training and school?
I'm going to try to get that in right now, and if I don't do it in enough detail, press me on it, because it's hard to get everything in, and Barb's going to keep me moving. Cause
You can ask me questions later. Okay.
Belle Kogan was born in the Ukraine in 1902. The Tsar of Russia was ruling the country at the time. My grandfather decided, let's leave this place. Nothing's good's going to happen here. He comes to the U.S. in 1904. My grandmother comes with the two children, the two daughters at the time. Belle, the older one, Sarah, my mother, the younger one of the two, 1905. They settled in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, in Catasauqua, then Allentown, then Bethlehem. My grandfather, unlike many of the Jewish immigrants of the time, did not want to end up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. There's no place for raising a family. He had a skill. He was a watch repair person and a jeweler, and he wanted to open a shop in a small town. He did that in Pennsylvania. So here is Belle and my mother in Allentown in 1909. They always regretted not wearing their best coats the day the photograph was made, but that's the way it goes. My mother always wanted to assure me that they had better clothing. Belle would have been known as Belle Kogan in school. The family was Kogan in Russia. Cohen is the same name here. And then by the time most of them moved back to New York City, where there are pages and pages of Cohens in the phone book, a number of them, including Belle, went back to the Kogan name, K-O-G-A-N. In her high school yearbook, it's clear she's viewed as a very talented artist. They're predicting great things in art for her. Her talent was recognized by a teacher, Miss Elizabeth Kynard, starting in 8th grade. This teacher took her on sketching expeditions, just she and Belle, in the town. Got her a scholarship to attend what's now the Parsons School of Design for summer courses in New York. Got her a scholarship to the Philadelphia Academy of Art that she unfortunately had to turn down after she had graduated from high school. But her talent as an artist was recognized and encouraged in her elementary or in her, especially in her what would it be, middle school, we call it, and high school years. The yearbook also refers to her male admirers, and she had many men interested in her. She was a striking redhead. But she had, by this time, 7 siblings. She was one of 8. And she felt she had raised, a family already. 7 younger sisters and brothers. She didn't want to get married at that time. She told my grandfather, I've done that. in a way. I've made friends, and that's great, but, you know, I don't want to do that thing. She wanted a career. She worked in his store. The family moved in 1922, all 8 of them and my grandparents, to New York. He had a jewelry store then on First Avenue, on the Upper East Side, and she worked in the store for most of the 1920s, selling and buying jewelry and buying silverware, things that would be used for wedding gifts and so on. So all this fine merchandise that she would later design, she had worked on as a buyer and seller and was becoming expert in what people looked for and how to explain the different advantages to customers, and also how to relate to the manufacturers who would send representatives to sell to them. So here she is, the 1928 version. She's 26 years old here. She had striking red hair. This is a portrait of her. She was also painting portraits at this time. She thought her career was going to be as a portrait painter.